Hello, everyone. This is Grandmaster Hans Niemann, and welcome to the chapter in the Jobava London regarding the third move, e6. This is going to be one of the most important chapters because the move e6 is the most common in the database and is just a natural move, and I'm going to explain that right here. Let's say after d4, knight f6, let's say we went for maybe like a c4 move. A lot of our opponent's instincts is to play the move e6 and develop their bishop that way. So this maybe is an insight into like the psychological reasoning why e6 is so popular. That's just my theory, and I think it's a pretty logical theory. But then when we play the move knight c3, we're obviously threatening to play the move e4 to take space in the center. So for the reaction is obviously to play d5 to stop this. And then after bishop f4, we've taken them into the Jobava London jungle, as I'd like to call it. I think this is sort of the entrance to such this jungle, and this is a position that a lot of your opponents are not going to be familiar with. This is a position that even top grandmasters are completely unfamiliar with. So this is sort of a way that you take them into your comfort zone, and you bring them to somewhere where you're comfortable and you're definitely going to be more familiar than your opponents. And the fact that you can get this position so easily and not really giving your opponent that many ways to deviate from that, we'll go into the deviations later on in the course. But from my experience, it's extremely likely that you're going to get this starting position. And then from here, you can, once you sort of understand the ideas and understand the different responses, then you can really start to develop a good intuitive feel for the opening. So in this case, we're going to be covering the move e6. We're going to discuss the move, all types of moves. We're going to discuss g6. We're going to discuss bishop f5. We're going to discuss c6, a6, c5. There are certainly quite a few moves here, but e6 is just the most natural. So this is, the first moment we're going to sort of think, right? Now, your instinct here, and a move that Jobava himself actually is known for playing, is the move e3. However, I have decided to put my own spin on this course and to sort of create my own theory and improve upon what is sort of considered as the main line here. And I even was someone who played the move e3 until even making this course. But after going into like really deep analysis and looking at things, I really just thought that the move knight to b5 is a much better practical choice that really forces our opponent to make a difficult decision. If we play the move e3, I really just sort of felt like they can play bishop b4, which I think almost all of your opponents would play, and then they can already castle, and it feels like it's a bit too natural, right, for black. We're not really letting our opponent make mistakes, which is why the move knight to b5, first of all, I wanted to make this course as simple as possible. So I really wanted to have the repeat sort of the general ideas. So you'll notice patterns throughout the openings, and those patterns can help you become a stronger player just by having a good intuitive feel for the opening. And I think I'll mention this phrase throughout the course, just building this intuitive feeling through seeing the common ideas. And I think once you can sort of feel an opening and you're confident and you're comfortable, that can really result in huge and immediate progress for a lot of players who struggle in the opening and who struggle in the middle game as well. Because here, you can sort of go to really similar middle game positions where you know things well. So, after the move knight b5, obviously, if you're a beginner player, your opponents might forget that you're threatening to take this c7 pawn and fork the king and rook. However, I suppose most of your opponents will defend this pawn. Now, the three ways to defend this pawn are knight to a6, bishop to d6, and bishop to b4. Now, the move knight to a6 is obviously the most natural, protecting the pawn. There's the move bishop to b4, c3, bishop a5. It's a little bit more awkward way of defending the pawn, but it's something that I faced quite a bit as well. So we're going to look into this. And then there's also sort of the less, this is not really one of the more critical choices. You can play bishop to d6. And here, after knight takes d6, c takes d6, we get the bishop pair, and these doubled pawns aren't that great. We're going to get into this later. But I just wanted to show you guys sort of a general agenda of what's going on after knight b5. But the important thing here is we're giving our opponents options, and we're giving them options for them to mess up, right? Where we want to make their lives difficult, especially as early as possible. So here, after knight to a6, we're going to continue with the move e3, developing, trying to bring the bishop out, just a very simple move. And here, our opponent sort of has two options, right? They can play the move c6, or they can play the move bishop to e7. Now, again, it's most likely going to transpose. Some opponents might want to castle immediately. Some might want to kick this knight out. I think it's quite natural to just kick the knight out immediately. It's like an instinctual thing to just, you see a piece that you can attack and move backwards, you attack that piece. So after knight c3, now this is sort of going to be the critical theme. This is going to be the first theme that I want you all to sort of pay attention to and to notice, is this knight on a6 is an issue. And this is sort of where the positional idea of this knight b5 idea is really going to come to fruition. Now, if you look at this knight, it's sort of stuck on the side of the board. You could potentially take and double the pawn structure. If the knight goes to c7, where is it going to go next? It just sort of sits there. Knight might have to just go back to b8, right? And then another point is, in this current pawn structure, a lot of times our opponents want to challenge with c5. But with knight on a6, it's sort of, in order to put additional pressure on the center, it would have to go back to b8 and back to c6. So this knight is just really a bad piece. And it's a piece we're going to be targeting throughout this opening. And this knight b5 idea is not only possible, I'll go back really quickly just to show it. When our opponents play the move g6, we're also going to be going for this knight to b5 idea. And we're going to get into that later, but I just wanted to sort of give that as an example. This knight b5 idea is going to come up throughout this course, and I want you to take special note of that. So back to the line that we were discussing. Knight a6, e3, c3, knight c3. So here our opponents have some options, right? The most natural is to play the move queen to c5, queen to b6, sorry. I think queen to c5, we have I think sometimes when you're subconsciously thinking about certain moves, you just like, a little Freudian slip. So that actually really happens to the best of us. So if you guys just say the wrong square, it literally is so common. Like I'll be, post-game analysis and I'll say square and my opponent will be like, sorry, that square? So it, happens to the best of us. So after, we protect the pawn with rook to b1, our opponents, again, still have options here. Things can get pretty interesting. First, I'm gonna go through the main line because this is just sort of the most logical moves. Bishop to e7, developing. Bishop praying to castle. We're gonna play knight f3, and after castles, this is where things get fun. I know this is sort of one of the this is not going to be the first time that we're going to be playing this move in such an aggressive and fashion. And we're going to really surprise our opponents with this move. And the Jobava London is known for being a very aggressive opening. However, I felt that the aggression that has been recommended and has been sort of normalized in the theory needs to be sort of adjusted to be a little bit more practical. So in some cases, people sort of in the Jobava just go absolutely crazy without having a good baseline. In my course, I'm really trying to show that you can play these really crazy and attacking ideas, but it's really important first to establish a strong base and develop your pieces to minimize the risk, right? So here, we're going to play the move g4. And this is a very, very likely position to get because our opponents has played pretty natural moves. And at this point, our opponents are actually in significant trouble. Now you might ask yourself, what happens if I just take this pawn? We're going to play the move rook to g1. And you might wonder, well, I just took a free pawn. What's the problem? And then you may ask yourself, okay, well, what if I just go back? after the move knight to e5, it's basically lights out. And that is not an over exaggeration. You'll notice this queen and knight are completely offsides and not aiding in the defense of the black king. You also notice that the bishop can come to h6, putting pressure on the g7 pawn. The bishop can come to d3. The queen can then come to h3. The king can even come to d2 to protect the rooks. We've got all of white's pieces are all staring at this black king, while the black queen and knight on a6 are completely offsides. So this position is absolutely dominating. And as I mentioned, bishop h6 is a threat. And this is just a free sort of steamroll. Now, the best move here and the only move here to equalize, I doubt that any of you will guess, even if there is an extremely, I'm sure there's grandmasters who are going to use this course. And those grandmasters are going to be the ones that I beat in this opening. And they want to try to learn how to beat me. For example, the people that I beat with this opening, Dubov, Duda, Predke, I've lost count of how many top GMs I've crushed with the Jobava. So to you listening, I hope you remember this move f6, because it's going to save you if we play. You have to give away the piece, allow everyone to take g4 because you have the move e5. And this is probably where the super GM opponents are going to stop watching and just be like, okay, hey. And then as they stop watching, I show you guys the move knight takes e5, and then you're like, okay, what is going on here? I'm giving back the piece. You give me piece. I give you a piece. It's like a game of chicken. I want to sacrifice all my pieces. After the move f takes e5, bishop takes e5, bishop takes g4, taking the rook, queen takes g4. I'm now down in exchange for a bishop and a pawn, but this bishop on e5 is just amazing. And yet again, this queen and knight are totally out of the game. Our opponents can defend the g7 pawn with rook f7. And now, this is the move that I think is absolutely amazing. And this is a move that is going to make your opponent question your sanity until you deliver the checkmate. King to d2. And you may ask yourself, Hans, are you okay? Is something, I know, like you guys, my loyal fans of mine who are watching this course and have followed my Twitch streams and follow my tournaments, remember when I had long, luscious hair, and some people, theorized that hair was the root of my chess skill because I just had so much of it. And you may think that I shaved my head and I've gone crazy, and now I'm playing moves like King D2 so casually. However, this is an interesting move that I found with the use of Leela, which is a unique supercomputer, which certainly suggests quite unique moves. And the point is we're actually baiting our opponents to play the move rook takes f2, because then we play the move bishop e2, and now they're forced to retreat back. And this extra tempo is actually crucial in continuing our attack. And now we play the move rook g1. And now everything is just crashing through with the pressure on the g7 pawn, with all the pieces working together. The bishop can come to d3, and you can target the h7 pawn. The knight could even reroute from e2 to f4, bringing all 5 of the pieces into the attack while these pieces sit idly by. So the only way for black to put up a fight after the move king to d2 is to play rook d8. Because this bishop is just so powerful that you need to trade this bishop off, bishop to d6. Bishop to d3, still leaving this pawn hanging. If rook takes f2, now you go knight to e2. And after the rook comes back, then you bring the rook in, and now the bishop is lined up on h7. Bishop, this is just perfect, right? So many arrows. It's like I'm, like Hikaru on a stream when he goes like, this. I can't even, my computer can't even handle how many arrows I'm drawing here. So they can try bishop to d6. Then we play f4. At some point we have to defend this pawn, right? because once this bishop is traded, it does sort of make our attack a little bit less powerful. But after takes, we're going to take with the f pawn. We've got this connected pass pawn and this chain of pawns that's extremely strong. And this king is actually extremely safe on d2. And you have extremely natural play with like rook g1, queen h5, targeting this. And this pawn structure is great. Again, the queen and knight are just so bad. I think this is a great introduction as we're gonna go into like, other different variations. But this is the main line. And I think this is a great introduction to the type of play that you're going for and the type of decisions that you force your opponent to make and putting our opponents in practically difficult positions. I think in chess, some of you might think that, it's important to play the number one computer moves and equalize perfectly and play all the best moves. But really, I have been able to sort of use the computer in a really interesting way when making this course, because I've been able to find moments where as humans, there are just certain things that are just really hard to see. And I think going back to what we discussed, when I see the move g4, and I see that after knight takes g4, rook g1, then f6 is the only move to be okay, I think to myself, wow, this is such a great idea, because from any practical standpoint, our human opponents are not going to play the move f6, because all of them are thinking, how do I protect the knight? Should I move the knight? Should I protect the knight? No one would think to, I'm not going to say no one, right? Because, Magnus Carlsen is unfortunately a person who could find this move against us. And maybe if I play this against him in the event, he'll have checked the course. But that would mean that Magnus bought my course, right? So that would be an accomplishment in and of itself. But my point is that this opening, especially with all the work that I've put in, I have been able to find in all of the main variations, the variations that a lot of top players write off as totally fine. I've been able to find holes and practical moments where we can put immense practical pressure on our opponents. I'm not going to argue that if your opponent is extremely well prepared and memorize all their lines, that you're still going to crush them. But I'm arguing that you're going to put them under immense practical pressure and get an extremely simple game and be significantly more familiar than your opponents. And I think that's the most effective thing about an opening. And that's another reason why I've recommended this to all my students when I was teaching, because it takes away all of the work in studying openings, studying middle games, because everything is just so ridiculously simple. So let's head back into some more variations and see how our opponents can sort of deviate. So let's continue with the main line. And let's see if our opponents try to just play the move bishop to e7. Let's say that they don't want to go for queen to b6. We're going to continue with knight to f3. Again, a very natural developing move. The great thing is often the best moves are just developing your pieces, and that's what makes this so great. Now, our opponents can still play the move queen to b6, but after rook b1, castles g4, we're going to be transposing into the previous line that we've got. So that means that, after castles, although g4 is very, very tempting here, and I did make a note, I firmly believe that we should take these attacking chances, and we should take our chances at the right moments. Now, if you are absolutely crazy and you just you don't want to play normal chess, maybe g4 is for you. But in this course, I want to find the balance, and I want to force you to find the balance between attacking and simply just playing normal, simple chess to let you get into a middle game and to get into a position where you feel comfortable. Because that's really the difficult part about any opening. It's just feeling comfortable and, really just getting your piece out. This is even I struggle with. Sometimes the hardest part about chess is just developing your pieces. So in this case, in the sun on a6, we're going to take advantage of that by playing bishop takes a6, pawn takes a6, and knight e5. Now, we've doubled our opponent's pawns, and we've created this sort of weakness on c6. And we're immediately pouncing on that. In this case, we could there protect the pawn with bishop to b7, and now we play the move knight to a4. And this is, from a positional perspective, is extremely instructive, because we've created this outpost on c5, and with the current structure, you'll notice all of them on light squares. There's definitely a potential to have sort of a dark square domination, right? For example, the knight can move back to d3, and we can really focus in on the c5 square. The bishop is great on this diagonal, and this bishop, we're really playing against this bishop on b7 just because of how the structure is currently set up. Now, our opponents need to play c5 to sort of open things up, right? If you don't open things up, this bishop is going to be locked in and stuck. So playing c5, trying to open things up. We're going to play knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen to a5, c3, queen takes c5. Now in this position, we have sort of reached an imbalance of the opposite colored bishops with these two bishops. Now, the critical point here is that we want to set up sort of a control over the dark squares. And we want to definitely restrict this bishop. So we're going to play the move g4. And you might say, wow, but Hans, you just said that we shouldn't play g4. We should take our chances. We should, because if we remember in this position, I recommended bishop takes a6 instead of the move g4. However, in this case, I'll go back to the line that we were discussing. g4 is extremely powerful. We should first note the concrete threat of playing g5, moving the knight away from the defense of the d7 square, and then knight to d7, forking the queen of the rook. So our opponents play the move queen to b5, getting the queen out of the way. So g5 isn't as popular. Isn't as popular. I am having Freudian slips, and you guys are just gonna love it and accept it. And I guess I'm just getting old. In my old age, retired streamer. You guys know how old I am. If you don't know how old I am very old and currently deteriorating. And now we're gonna play the move a4. And you're probably like, wow, Hans, you're crazy. What about this b2 pawn? So okay, take this b2 pawn. I'm gonna castle. And I'm gonna ask you, what is that queen doing on c3? Because I'm threatening to play rook to b1, and this bishop, I'm gonna win this bishop. So our opponents are forced to play the move bishop to c8, getting the bishop out of the diagonal, and then we play the move f3. And at this point, we are absolutely dominating our opponent and really showing the strength and the power of activity. In this position, we're stopping the knight from coming to e4. We're preparing perhaps an idea with queen d4 or rook to b1. And the funny thing is we might be down a pawn here, but the pawn we're down is a doubled pawn. And the funny thing is let's say our opponents could take away the a6 pawn, they probably would, because then the bishop could come to a6. So there's an argument to be had that positions, material is equal, right? On a positional point, we're just better. So here there's two options. There's knight to d7. And it's funny, at this point, this is where our trap reveals itself. Now we play knight takes d7, bishop takes, and bishop to d6. And this queen is on the verge of getting trapped. Let's say you played a move like, rook to c8, bishop to b4. Where's that queen going? Rook f2, and that queen's going to be trapped. So this is quite a tricky idea. At this point, we force our opponents to play queen takes c3, rook a3, queen c6. We take the exchange, we bring the queen in, and now we've got an extremely imbalanced position where opponents have a bishop and two pawns, but it's more like one pawn because these are double pawns for a rook. So it's an extremely imbalanced position. We forced our opponents to make a lot of difficult moves to get here, and we put them under severe practical pressure. So I would say that the likelihood of someone making it this far is quite unlikely. But I like to show these variations just to show how difficult it is for our opponents, our human opponents. And remember the word human, everyone is human, right? So or most of your opponents are human. So this is going to be difficult. So there was another deviation, the move queen to b6, retreating, and then we're going to play the move c4. And I could have, if I was preparing, if I wanted to make this chapter excessively long, I could probably go into this position 15 moves deeper, but that just wouldn't be necessary. I think the important point that I want you to understand here is that despite being down a pawn, we've got a great initiative. We've got a very powerful bishop and knight controlling the dark squares, and the bishop and rook are just totally undeveloped, and we've got a lot of activity. And whenever you have activity and your opponent is passive, it's just always sort of easier to play. So this was certainly an interesting variation, and sort of a way that things can go wrong for our opponent and how we can put pressure. So in this case, after c6, knight to c3, there's also the move c5. This is also a very natural move as well, because the idea is to sort of put immediate pressure on the center. And however, this sort of opens up this b5 square for us, and we might be occupying this square pretty soon. First, we want to bring this knight to f3, and then after the move queen to b6, we're going to go right back to this b5 square. And you'll notice that the dynamic between the knight and bishop between this knight is really great. And this knight is essentially paralyzed, because it can't go to b8 because of knight c7. It can't go to c7 because knight c7. So it's sort of unclear how our opponents are really going to do anything. However, there is a quite a critical point here, where our opponents play the move c4, cutting off the bishop and the knight. However, we are so determined to keep this knight on the square. We play a4. Our opponents can sort of attack this knight. And after c3, bishop takes. We are sacrificing a pawn here. However, this sacrifice is going to put our opponents in a very difficult spot. And in this case, you might think, well, this pawn's hanging. Well, who cares, right? Simply bishop to e2. And who cares, right? Development and activity is much more important in this case. Now, you might ask yourself, queen takes b2. Let me be greedy. Let me be, Yasser Sarwan, and take all your pawns, and like the Grinch on Christmas, taking all your presents. I apologize to Yasser for comparing you to the Grinch, but it had to be done. In this case, you're going, a little bit too far. And after queen to a4, knight to e5, this queen is going to be in pretty big trouble. You can castle and even just pitch the piece. You can even play knight to e5. I think this is where we say enough, and I think even Yasser would be hesitant to take such a juicy pawn. But I'd like to think that he can show restraint sometimes as well, because everyone, we have to sympathize with pawn grubber addicts, and it's a serious addiction that we should all be respectful towards. And unfortunately, Yasser has suffered for that through his career, and I'm sure many of you suffer for that. Sometimes you have to go to like AA meetings for taking pawns. I know it's difficult, and you all struggle with it. So I hope that the people who want to play queen takes b2 relate with that, and can sympathize. However, on a more serious topic, because I don't want to get too emotional, knight to e4 is the best move. Again, now sort of putting pressure again on b2, not directly taking the pawn, but the idea is to play bishop d6 to remove this bishop. We're going to play knight to d2, preventing that. Knight takes d2, queen takes d2. And now we have a very interesting dynamic. So certainly we have these two bishops, which I'm sure you noticed. However, we are down to the pawn for the short term. But the point here is we're going to get compensation, of course. And the compensation is going to happen, well, first of all, this knight's on the rim of the board. Knights on the rim are dim. I'm sure you've heard that one too many times if you've watched enough chessable courses. And obviously the king's still in the center, right? So we still have a slight lead in development. Now, we have this threat and this sort of idea of pushing b3 or b4 eventually. So it makes a lot of sense. Our opponents really would like to challenge this bishop, right? Because this bishop is the gem of the Jobava London. This bishop reigns supreme, right? So our opponents want to move the queen somewhere to bring queen d6, right? So they have queen to d7, they have queen to b6, they have queen to c6. I think queen d7 is the most natural. I don't know, queen c6 looks a little bit weird to me. Maybe that's just me, but queen d7 feels like an intuitive move. And in this case, when the opponent's king is in the center, we open up the center and we go for an immediate attack. And I think, d takes e4, after our last intervention about pawn grabbing, I don't feel a need to get into specifics here. Well, first of all, the bishop, the c4 pawn is hanging. That's number one. You can take the c4 pawn. You could even go queen e3 first. But again, these pawns are sort of collapsing, and it just makes a lot more sense to keep the structure solid and just immediately challenge the bishop. But now we take on d5, and after recaptures, our opponent wants to castle next. We're not going to allow that. We're going to play the queen e3 check. Now, in this case, it's a bit of an uncomfortable situation because we would ideally like to block with the queen, let's say queen to e6 or queen to e7. But in both those cases, you take the bishop, and after queen e3, f3, you lose a piece. Forcing the king to f8, now it's sort of already tangible how clear our compensation is, right? Our opponents cannot castle. We have lead in development. Our lack of a pawn is starting to feel less and less significant. And now we play another extremely strong move, bishop to e5, sort of dominating the tension between these two bishops on d6 and e5, and saying, if you want to take my bishop, I'm going to take it with a pawn, and I'm going to create this strong central structure. Open up my queen, putting pressure on a7 potentially. The rook can't move. f4, castles f5, e6. So you're saying if you want to take my bishop, you can, but it's going to be on my terms. Now in this case, let's say our opponent tries to play f6. What do we say? Queen f4, right? If you want to take this bishop, you can take it on my terms. I'm not going to trade this bishop unless you do it in the way that I like it. And now in this case, our opponent is still in a very difficult situation because again, if you take, we take on e5 and we put pressure on f6 and the king side's collapsing, and there's not really a way to sort of if you play the move rook d8, then we can just castle. And again, things are still a little bit uncomfortable, things are unclear, and we're developing so quickly. The bishop can come in, the rooks are coming in, the knight still can't really move because of pressure on a7. It really feels like, from a practical perspective, of course, maybe put the engine on, it says 0, 0, 0. But from a practical perspective, I really like white's position. And I think it's a very natural conclusion to have. So the great thing about this position as well is if they play queen c6, we play a4. If they play queen b6, we play e4. So the funny thing is after queen to c6, e4, bishop d6, although there is d takes e4 as an option here because we're protecting the c4 pawn, bishop d6, we play the exact same idea of e d5, queen e3, and putting pressure. So it's actually extremely easy to remember sort of what you're going to do, right? Because if we go through this variation and we sacrifice the pawn, all you have to remember is knight to d2, and anywhere the queen moves, you're going to play e4. So again, the thematic ideas remain the same. So queen dc6 is another, I think, more challenging move, because after e4, you have to consider d takes e4. Now, in this case, we're down 2 pawns, but we go queen e3. And we say, okay, I'm down 2 pawns. But I've got the 2 bishops, and I've got a very sneaky idea of playing the move f3. And I want this bishop on this diagonal. Now, let's say they play bishop d7, and now we play f3. Again, pawn grabber is anonymous, taking ef3, bishop f3. And now we've got some extremely nasty tactics going on here. To name one of them, queen d7, rook takes a6, takes, winning a piece. Queen to c8. Could even go queen e4. Next, you're taking b7. Even queen here. Why not just go queen e4? Again, once b7 falls, the rook is under attack, the knight is under attack, the whole house collapses. This is the foundation of the structure of this b7 pawn, especially with the 2 powerful bishops. So you're forced to actually castle, give back the pawn. And now in this case, we have recuperated the pawn. We were only down 1 pawn. We have the extremely strong bishop pair. We have a strong center. We have the open file for the rook. This is a great position, an extremely easy position to play. And next you're going to castle. You have even play on the f file. Maybe you're going to go for queen g3, bishop h6, putting attack on the king. Maybe the c4 pawn is also a little bit tender. That is tender as a term you can be used in chess. I would like to clarify that for those who might be wondering if I could be using it. What's a synonymous? What is the website? A thesaurus. Yes, thesaurus is your best friend in high school. I'm sure a lot of high school students can relate to the thesaurus. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but yeah, if you're in high school, use a thesaurus. But yeah, very tender pawn, very loose pawn, very weak pawn. Those are maybe some better words to use. So we've discussed this line. Okay, I should also show queen to b6, e4, and bishop to d6. And now in this case, since this queen on b6 is sort of poorly placed, we're going to go e5 here. And after bishop b7, we're going to castle. And it's really important to understand why this queen b6 move actually slows down our opponent's counterplay. And I think to really fully illustrate that, we should look at the position, let's say, with queen to c6. Let's say e4, bishop d6, e5, bishop e7. With the queen on c6, it's quite clear that our opponent's idea is going to be to play, knight c7, b5, a4, and b4 to sort of launch an attack on the queen side. And this one extra tempo, putting the queen on c6 instead of b6, is that one crucial tempo that's going to make our attack break through one move sooner. So with a queen on b6, e4, bishop d6, e5, now castles, we're going to go, bishop g3 or bishop e3 or f4, f5, and our attack is crashing through immediately, right? That one extra tempo is going to change absolutely everything, right? Bishop can reroute to c2 maybe to put an attack on the king. Very natural play here. I'm going to take a sip of water because my mouth is dry, and you guys are just going to pretend like I'm saying something useful. So in this position, we can also just develop with bishop e7, but this gives us a crucial tempo to play a4. And now c4 just isn't as powerful because we've already sort of reinforced this knight properly. And after castles c3, this knight is just absolutely dominant over this knight, and it's just this knight is secured, right? If they try to play bishop d7, we go knight e5. We're ready to take this bishop if knight ever becomes a problem. We can look to g4 as an idea. Let's say they take and go knight dc7 to try to take this pawn. We don't care. We're playing g4. Gary the g pawn is running. As Simon Williams has named every pawn. And if you memorize, I have not memorized all of them. I think I can try. They're probably all British names for all the pawns, Harry, Gary, Freddie, Eddie, Danny, maybe. I don't know. I'm not much of an expert on British names. I think it'd be a bad sign if I was. So our opponents have to play rook to d8, and if you love how quickly I switch from amazing humor to chess, I think that's just a talent of mine. Obviously the threat before, or maybe not obviously, but g5 to play knight to d7, actually trap the queen, which is quite a nice feat. After rook d8, we play g5, knight e4, h4. Again, this pawn just doesn't matter. This rook is active, and we're going straight for the king. Next, you could play bishop d3 is coming next, queen to c2. The pawn really is just absolutely irrelevant. I think this is every Jobava London player's dream, to get such a dominant attack. And the great thing is, because the king is sort of safe in the center, because the center is sort of closed and not directly opening up, you have full sort of freedom to continue with the attack. So this is sort of one way that things can go extremely wrong. Again, black playing all very natural moves. So instead of the move c6, we should also note that they can play bishop d7 immediately, which is another very logical, just developing move. Some players might want to leave this knight here because they don't see the immediate need to kick it away. So after knight f3, castles, we should also note the move knight to h5, which we're going to get into after this. After castles, bishop to e2, again, normal development, c6, knight to c3. And then our opponents can go for queen b6, which sort of, it's a little bit of a delayed version. But after rook to b1, we should note that we did have this position actually in the previous line, but the bishop was on f1 and we were able to play g4. So this is a move order where our opponents can avoid that direct push with g4, but still we're able to develop quite naturally. So after c5, we castle, bishop to d7, knight to e5. It's always great to sort of have this knight in e5. It's just a strong sort of square and supported by the bishop and the structure. And especially with a knight on a6, our opponents can't really go knight to c6 that easily, because usually a knight on e5 is challenged by a knight on c6, but without that direct challenge, the knight is quite strong. So rook to d8 is just protecting the bishop. And then now, obviously, it would not be a Jobava London course without the move g4. And I think this transposes to another line that we're going to discuss. But basically, next is g5, and then e4, h4, and we've sort of closed the structure. Not closed, but we're not under sort of direct pressure. A little bit of pressure, but just not enough pressure to sort of prevent us from expanding on the queen side. So after the move in h5, this is a move that I even faced myself in an actual game. We're going to play bishop to e5. We don't want to let our opponent take this bishop. We want to force them to play f6, forcing the bishop. Forcing. I am just hungry and I'm thinking about forks. Forcing, yes, forcing. I did just eat, so I shouldn't be hungry. I had some great Shake Shack. Now, in this position, after f6, I played the move bishop to g3 in my game, and after castles, I played c4. However, an interesting move that should be noted is the move g4. And here, the idea is that after f takes c5, we actually play knight takes c5. And after knight f6, we play g5. And here, it's really difficult for our opponents to play, because anywhere the knight moves, let's say knight e4, knight d7, knight g8, or queen h5, everything is just collapsing. For example, knight to e4. And if they don't move, then we take the knight back, right? And then once we take the knight, again the queen can still come to h5. So this is sort of a nice nuance. I'll show the variation after knight to knight e4, queen h5, g6, knight takes, takes. And now black's position is just in ruins. We've got 2 pawns and a rook for 2 pieces. But again, like maybe king d7. I guess you could even trade the queens. You could even just move the queen back. King on d7 just doesn't look too nice. So this is a nice nuance. We can look at bishop g3, and after my opponent played castles, I played the move c4. And I think this is one of the only positions in the Jobava London where we play the move c4. But essentially, the point is it's really important to put sort of pressure in the center if we can. And another thing is we sort of want our opponents to take on g3, because if they take, then they open up this rook, and with our opponent, with them f6 being included, it sort of weakens the light squares a bit. So we can go for like an attack, over here. So c4 also makes the case like if they play c6, we retreat with the knight, and now the knight isn't behind the pawn. We've got central control, and we've like transposed a normal queen's gambit decline position with this really weird knights on h5 and a6. So this is another sort of interesting way things can go. So yeah, this was other than c6, this is bishop b7 is pretty logical. So I believe we've covered everything here. I think this was really an interesting chapter. This was sort of the one of the chapters where I really improved my knowledge in the opening. Like I really felt like before when I was playing the move e3 here, I actually really felt like this is where I didn't feel comfortable, and a lot of my opponents were challenging me, and I was getting into trouble, and I didn't feel too comfortable. But once I really looked into knight b5, I think it's clear, as we've analyzed here, that we put our opponents under really significant tactical pressure. So I think the main themes and the main patterns that we're going to notice here is obviously this knight a6, this knight a6, sort of targeting this knight, and sort of noticing that this knight and bishop are really powerful and dominating this knight. And if you can sort of dominate one piece, it often messes up all of our opponent's harmony. And then I think it's also important to note that I think the best example of this g4 break. The best example of this g4 break is in this position. And I think we can also show that when the center is closed and our opponents can't really challenge the center, we can go for these sort of flank attacks with the move g4. And our opponents are sort of just too focused on the queen side to respond to these ideas. So I think sort of a mix of provoking this knight to a6 combined with a king side attack, I think is a really sort of useful thing to note. And I really think this is a great representation. And these are a lot of new ideas as well. A lot of these ideas have never been played before, and they're complete novelties. So a lot of the mainline theory in the Jobava London, I'm completely transforming and changing and improving. So I really think that this is a way for you to create competitive edge over your opponents by being so much more familiar and comfortable. And I think this is just a representation of how simple the Jobava London can be. So thank you guys for watching the chapter on 3e6. And I'm looking forward to the next.